ska vi få höra historien om digitaliseringen av mobilitet. Och då ska jag strax lämna plats på scenen för inte mindre än 4 stycken presentatörer. Vi har Magda Collado som är då viktorian sedan 3 år tillbaka. Ungefär Magda, va? Vi har Warberg från Volvo Cars, Extended Offer Manager. Tror jag att du har rollen som. Och du har tidigare ett förflutet som konsult på Semcon och ÅF, om jag är rätt informerad. Och där kan du, ursäkta mig. Ja. Och så har vi Jan Hellåker. Du är programchef för Digitalisering Sweden här nu, men har ett långt förflutet inom fordonsindustrin på Arby Volvo. Du har varit i USA, varit chef för Volvo USA, och du har varit på Telematics. Och har då en anställning nu här på Lindholmen Science Park. Och sen har vi sist men inte minst Hans Arby, en ständig och välkommen gäst på Viktoria Forum. Du stod på scenen föregående år också. I år en lite annan roll, i alla fall så som vi såg det Pelle och jag när vi pratade om det i början. Du sitter med i regeringens samverkansgrupp för nästa generationens resor och transporter. Och det är inte det perspektivet också som du har med dig in här. Och Sven-Erik Svensson som jag såg här förut, utan du är kvar, sitter också i den där du sitter också i den där gruppen. Så du får kolla här nu att han säger rätt saker. Ja. Så välkomna upp plats på scenen. Varsågoda.
I write the newsletter for Drive Sweden, Smart Mobility, and in case you don't already subscribe, I recommend that you do. You can go to drivesweden.net to do that. There I actually get several hundreds of news pieces a day that I have to go through and filter in order to make this newsletter. So we see that there is actually a big hype and there's a lot of things happening with this. During our first edition, the Boston Consultancy Group wrote a report that we published where they said that car sharing was basically just a buzz, that it would not really have a big impact in the auto industry. I don't know if I necessarily agree, because we've seen that there's been a huge change with the OEMs and how they are working and trying to acquire new companies, trying to link themselves to either mobility companies or other forms of tech companies that can enable them this transition towards mobility. So here you see how this ecosystem is evolving in just a couple of months, basically the beginning of this year to now. This is what has happened. So the ecosystem has changed quite a lot. There's have been a lot of alliances that have been formed and continue to be formed. The latest, I think it was Hyundai and Amazon that got linked together. There are reports that say that we will reach peak car ownership by 2020, and that is mainly due because of automation and shared mobility services. So we're going to slowly start seeing a decrease in vehicle sales, and that will be replaced by selling automated mobility services. We see that this trend is already affecting the way companies are built. So LinkedIn is a new company that was developed with sharing as their core value proposition. We see, for example, Uber having to redo its app because it's had too many services, so they had to redo their app because there's a convergence also of potential services, ride sharing, car sharing, all of these with autonomous vehicle might just merge into one single type of mobility service where we're just going to order a car and it will come to us, and we don't care if it's car sharing or ride sharing. We might want to pay for depending on distance, depending on time, comfort, or environmental aspects, but it's not going to be the purpose of having a car anymore. This decrease in car ownership can also impact other areas, for example, dealerships. Once you don't want to own a car, how will you actually sell cars? You will have to sell mobility instead. We can potentially see that there will be virtual showrooms where people can experience the vehicles that they would then like to access through their mobility package. So these are a lot of the things that have happened. A lot of more things are happening. And I would like to actually welcome to the stage my Carl first, who is from Volvo. And Carl, I was wondering if you could help me from the OEM's perspective. How do you see this change, and how do you think Volvo will position itself for this change?
Thank you, Magda. It's an honor to be here. It's also nice to see so many colleagues in the audience. But I will start by introducing myself. I'm working in the marketing department of Volvo Cars. We're called Global Consumer Experience. My task is to develop new services for the connected car. And the connected car is, of course, the base for sharing cars. We believe that when we connect the car, we will be able to integrate towards other kinds of partners and interfaces, and we will make new kinds of business than we're used to do. We don't think that the car will be the centerpiece and the main contact point of our customers. We think the phone or some kind of wearable will do this. But by connecting the car, we can make new customer offers than we're doing today. Of course, driving a Volvo will still be a core business in I would say, at least 5 to 10 years. But we also see new ownership models, so it should be possible to book a Volvo. It should also be possible to share your Volvo with other people. We also see that we can develop our aftermarket into something new. We're used to sell accessories such as roof box. They are used once a year during 1 week when you're going on your skiing trip. Why not rent it and have it assembled on your roof of the car? So that is something we're looking into. We're also looking into making the car life easier. You shouldn't have to go and fuel your car. It should just be done automatically. The same with services and repairs and damages. Looking into the mobility market, we will offer new mobility offers in the long and the short term. If we look at it, how it's looking today, we're used to sell cars to companies who are selling cars to people, or to taxi companies, or to rental companies. When we're connecting the cars, these offers will change. So people will share their own cars. I don't think you will have to call a taxi in 3 to 4 years. You will order it through an app. I think that rentals will diminish. It will become something else. You won't have to go far outside of the city to find a car and rent it for the weekend. You will have some kind of subscription that you then use for long-term rentals and short-term rentals. If we then look at what will happen with the public transport, I think the limit between public transport and your own car will diminish in the future. You will be able to book an autonomous vehicle just like you're able to just hop on a train. And all of these worlds will be integrated in some way. So if you look at us as a company, we're used to work with metal and big factories. We're making money on selling cars to companies who are selling cars. We have to adapt to this new world. But how do we do it? Looking at the car sharing market in Sweden today, it's worth about not even 1% of our turnover. So we can't just hop on this train directly and not offer cars. We have to make a step-by-step approach and choose which partners we should cooperate with. And we have to make all of this in the right order. Take, for example, rental cars. Hertz is a big customer to us. They're buying a lot of cars. But what will they do in the future when the usage rates of the cars increases? These are the questions that we are trying to figure out the right answer to. We could also argue that maybe we should own thousands of cars and let people book them. just like Car2Go did in Stockholm, where they invested in 250 cars, made around 60 million SEK of loss in 2 years, and then have a car park of 250 cars that they need to, in some ways, sell. So the risks are quite high, and we don't really know how to proceed. So we need to develop a strategy in this area. And maybe we should just let our customers decide. So if they want to share their cars, they should be able to do so. Thank you.
It's great that you applaud. I think it's a very exciting times ahead. Thank you for that. We will also be around for further questions, but I would now like to introduce Jan Hellåker, which is who is the program manager for Drive Sweden. Janne, you've been traveling around the world quite a lot, and you've seen and talked to different people in charge of the deployment of autonomous vehicles and also these new forms of mobility services. In your opinion, how does Sweden position itself? Where are we going and how are we doing?
Well, thanks, Magda, for that question, and thanks for letting me be here. You think I would have planned that question, but that's not the case. You came up with it yourself. Before I go there, let me just briefly explain what we do in Drive Sweden. I have the most fun job in Sweden right now, I promise you. Drive Sweden is a strategic innovation program, which is an instrument that is set in place by basically Näringsdepartementet. And our specific task in Drive Sweden is to provide a collaboration platform to facilitate the development and deployment of new mobility services. So with that saying, and that's leading into my answer to your question, initially there was a lot of self-driving vehicles in our scenarios and in our agendas, but actually what we do is much more about services and bringing it to the mobility service level. So to answer your question finally, yes, by now there isn't almost one country or one city in the world that hasn't announced themselves or claimed themselves to be the epicenter of self-driving vehicles. Everyone sees a gold mine there and want to become the preferred test site by the OEMs, but very few will succeed. So that's a starting point. And in that case, I think with our very strong automotive presence in Sweden, we are definitely taking the lead in that section as well, not the least by the very recommendable work that is being done by Volvo Cars. But then if you mix in the mobility services in this picture and really see, is there a vision behind what people are trying to do in all the countries, then the story becomes the picture becomes much more blurry. In the US, not so much again on the sort of public side, and that's mainly because that you can't build this mobility as a service, and I think Hans will speak more about that later on there, unless you base it on a really good public transportation system as a backbone. Some people have claimed that we will be served by a zillion of pod cars putting us around in the city, and obviously any one of you here can figure out that will never fly. So you need a public transportation in the bottom, and in the US you don't have that, although some of the commercial players like Uber you mentioned has a very interesting effort and approach to this topic. So literally it boils down, and obviously now I'm speaking a little bit on my bias by my current role, but I think the two countries in the world that has a similar type of vision and is somewhat similar capabilities of getting there are actually Sweden and Singapore. Singapore has obviously a very small country, but they have a very strong willingness and obviously strong government. But they have spelled out their vision. This is what we want to do. They want to improve their mass transit system, which is already good. They want to bring in self-driving vehicles to provide first and last mile connections to that system. They're suffering from not having really an automotive industry. Some tier ones, but they're not having the luxury of Sweden. We have 5 major vehicle manufacturers within a population of less than 10 million. So that, I think, is our strength. Our weakness in that case, if you should compare the two, is probably that we may not, our processes to make things happen and the funding levels, despite the last week's announcement, may be on par with what the country like Singapore could come up with. But finally, yes, we are in really good shape, and with the collaboration we have in Drive Sweden, I think we have a wonderful starting point to make it even better and make Sweden the main exporter of mobility services of the future.
That's really great to hear, and I think it motivates a lot of us to keep going in the right direction. And now, finally but not last, I'd like to welcome Hans Arby. He's going to present to us a little bit about what's going on in Moss. We've discussed this before because you and still now represent UBGO as well to some degree. Hans, what do you think is really required for us to reach that level of integrated mobility, to reach that level of mobility as a service as everyone talks about it? Seamless mobility, one single shop, one single payment method, etc. How are we doing? What's holding us back? What can we do to keep going forward?
That's a simple question. I will start a little bit with this samverkansgruppen for next generations travel and transport. What is happening, you probably read more about what's happening in Finland because they're a little bit better at PR, even though we were first. So these samverkansgrupper, that's a government put together, is trying to find initiatives or things we can do in a quite short term to get things going. And within this group in transport, let's say 2 out of 5 initiatives, and the most heavy one is concerned with mobility as service or combined mobility, integrated mobility. So one is more looking at policy things to get a national upscaling. The other one is taking, so to say, the next step to have connected automatic electrical vehicles, and that's going to be a lot about Drive Sweden being kind of the host for building a real mobility as a service, autonomous mobility as a service living lab. So that's one piece. And also in what's called forskningspropositioner, you talk now more about not transport in itself, but services that do a good job for people and businesses. But then looking at mobility as a service, how many are familiar with the term mobility as a service? That's quite good. Typically we inside the Moss community think that everybody knows, and being in some conferences that I thought everybody would know and don't see any hand. So if you should call it a hype or not, that's maybe a local hype. But it's still a hype, and it's very interesting to be inside a hype. I worked as a freelance journalist during the 90s and wrote the first popular science article about internet in the paper Zeta, if you remember that one. But really being inside and really understand what's behind the hype and why things are not happening as fast as many think. And it's not about technology, because it's already there or could easily be developed. But it's more understanding you need to have good business models. I know that Per-Erik usually show this, that it's about digitalization plus new business models that gives new services. And that is, you have to be able to create value enough so that somebody want to pay for a service. And you have to be able to capture then somebody to capture that value so you can pay for the investment and running of a service. And that is so easy to say the technology makes this all possible, but you really must be able to run a sustainable business. It's also about this transition thing. You can see a perfect society. I think you mentioned this International Transport Forum that made a simulation about Lisbon, where you can replace all private car and buses, just keep the metro with shared taxi and shared minivans. That is a fantastic society, better accessibility, cheaper and everything. But how do you get there? Also electrical roads, how do you get there? So it's making this transition that is kind of complex. And also then disrupting ecosystem, because if you need to change the current ecosystem that we have today, and that will hurt for many ones, and you always try to protect yourself. And when you look at mobility as service, offering a combined service, it's not as easy as starting up an Uber or a rental car shop. It's the system. You need to have public transport on board in an active and good way. So that makes it more complex. So that's why it also takes a little bit longer time, I think.
Thank you so much for that answer. I agree that it's absolutely not at all about technology. Most of the technology we already have available, but I think in my experience and dealing with these issues as a researcher, it's been about integration and who should lead this transformation.
Yeah.
That's usually the really hard part. So I ask the three of you, what do you think is really required? What is the main factor that would make us reach that tipping point to go into mobility services?
I think it sounds like a product placement, but Mats Leander usually showed this about leadership prism, that everybody, every actor, also the existing one, has to gain, but somebody has to lead. And the one that has to lead is the one that could make the most money out of it. If you say that mobility service is replacing car ownership, then it has to be somebody that really makes the most money of replacing car ownership to be a service consumer. And that's not typically, maybe not the car manufacturer, it's not public transport and so on. It's some kind of third party. And we see in Europe a lot of the automobile clubs are looking into this because they have a customer and they're changing focus from serving the cars to the users. So there could be many different, like Ubigos and Most Global, but also in Finland, Telia Sonera is looking into this. Somebody that want to solve a problem for the customer.
Jana, would you like to say something?
Yeah, a lot of things need to happen, but I think we're going to be helped by the fact that we're really into a generation shift right now, in which I believe particularly the younger generation really want to have this. So for once in any technological development that I've been part of, there's a strong consumer pull. I think there will be. So just like the teenagers and of course have grown used to subscribing to music when Spotify are out in the market, I think it won't take long until we see the same thing happen in mobility, and then somehow someone will come up with a decent and a good solid business case.
Carl, what do you think?
No, I think that it's a huge challenge for us to change into this new environment, but somehow we will have to adapt, or maybe lead in some areas. And I think we will see something coming from the OEMs as well, not just investing in external companies.
Just a final question to the three of you, whoever wants to answer. Let's talk about sustainability with these services. What do you think are what is the white elephant in the room regarding sustainability and autonomous vehicles and mobility services?
Okay. That has to do with the governance. Let's say if I'm a mobility provider, I need to have public transport on board. If I'm running self-driving taxi fleets, I need to use the roads. So what the city and other authorities can do is setting up the boundaries, making these services sustainable. And that's really the challenge that they should be working and thinking on today, because that's going to be hard. Different kind of dynamic charging and so on, so you really kind of steer.
Yeah. Regulations, international harmonization of the legal framework, and also I think we have a technical challenge. Luckily, mobility as a service isn't, as I was saying a minute ago, dependent on self-driving vehicles. But I think the real level 5 self-driving functionality, that's going to be a long time.
Would you like to add it?
No, I can just agree with these gentlemen.
That's good. Well, how about a round of applause for our panelists?
Tack så mycket. Medan vi skiftar, för nu ska vi skifta fokus igen. Nu är det sjöfart som gäller. Och vi ska få lyssna till hur sjöfarten nyttjar digitaliseringens möjligheter. Har vi... Medan vi skiftar, har vi tid med någon fråga till tidigare talare? Är det någon? Varsågod, har vi micken här? Där.
Lars Warberg, SV. Jag ställer frågan. Hallå? Ja. Lars Warberg, SP. Jag ställer frågan till någon av er. I det politiska i den politiska utveckling vi ser nu, där länderna sluter sig, hur ser ni på harmoniseringsproblematiken här? Det är ju liksom inget direkt politiskt klimat för att jobba med harmonisering.
Det är jag som representerar regeringen då, vilket jag inte gör. Men alltså, det som vi kanske då med mobilitetstjänster och sånt, den behöver ändå på något sätt köras lokalt och vi kan supporta med liksom teknik och kunskap och sådär. Så jag tror det är värre för Volvo och så om det går åt fel håll. För det kommer ju krävas mycket standardisering kring självkörande bilar och de här bitarna också. Så det kan ju vara ett problem, säger jag.